to the cloud, get that information. And thanks for being here. So hi again, everyone. I'm Joy Brand-Richardson. I am the Vice President of JCC Association Professional Development. And I'm glad that you're spending some time with us. This was a sort of pop-up peer community that we decided Ashley and Michelle had reached out and said, hey, let's do some follow-up and let's look forward to our Leading Edge survey and some information about Leading Edge and the benchmarking survey as well that JCC Association does. So we have Andy Paller with us, who is the Vice President of and Community Consultation, Director of JCC Benchmarking and Strategic Performance. And we're very happy that he's going to be joining us and giving us some insights into the Leading Edge results, which all of you, if you're a benchmarking community, a Leading Edge community, then you should have received that last week. I'm going to turn it over to Michelle and Ashley to give us any kind of insights and thoughts before Andy starts. They're looking at me like, what?
I'll just jump in really quick. So thank you, Andy, for helping us out and being here today. We appreciate it. I think it's a heavy topic on many of the minds of all of the JCCs around the country. And we just want to kind of open up the conversation and let Andy give us a high level summary and some information, and then as well break into question and answers as to specifics that you have for Andy and or share thoughts or successes or things from the past or things you're looking to change moving forward. So at this point, unless Ashley has anything else to add to that, I think we can turn it over to Andy.
No, I think that was great. Thank you so much, Andy.
You're welcome. I have relatively little to present, so I'm not going to talk at you for more than 10 minutes, 15 minutes. But with Joy, have been neck deep in the Leading Edge process. Actually, for a couple of years. We've 3 years ago began helping to recruit JCCs. Last year, we provided the after survey consultation to most of the participating JCCs, and we'll be doing that again this year. Joy is my partner in organizing that. So direct your questions to both of us. Just some high-level information. So on a week ago, Monday, 82 JCCs received their data from the 2023 Employee Experience Survey. It was like 80% higher than the year before. We went from 46 JCCs to 82 JCCs, community centers and camps, including 26 participating for the first time in this Leading Edge survey. So we're excited, not only because we think this is a great tool for JCCs to hear what's on the minds of their staff, and if they continue to participate to track progress, but also a great opportunity for us to get data on the staff from 82 JCCs. There were more than 6,000 JCC staff members who completed the survey, and we are just toe deep into looking at the results. JCC's organizations got them on Monday. We didn't get the data till Friday, so we are early in our exploration, but 6,180 employees. The average response rate for JCCs was 42%, with a lot of variation. I was a bit surprised, as was, I think, Leading Edge. We had 5 JCCs with really low response rates, less than 20%. On the other end, we had 19 who had response rates above 60%. So all over the board. Something that you'll want to factor into your analysis when you start looking at your data, and that we will be looking at as well. Although I having looked at this in benchmarking and in the Leading Edge, I do think it's fair to say that the JCC workforce, on average, is different from the typical Jewish organization. The numbers of very part-time staff, our lifeguards and our teachers for a cooking class or a front desk slot. Very different from typical JCCs, and I think from typical organizations, and I think that impacts our response rate. So I'm not losing sleep over it, but if you're at 40% or 50%, that's awesome. It reflects the work that your JCC did to both encourage staff to participate and to make them feel comfortable about doing so. If you're on the lower end, we'll call that an opportunity for improvement moving forward, and a chance to, at least with the data you have, to understand a bit better what's going on with your folks. Just a couple last points on who participated. One of the questions we were asked frequently during benchmarking is, do we have a representative sample? Who answered the survey? If it's 30%, 40%, 60%, who answered, who didn't answer? And the way we typically respond, and these data support that, is for sure the staff who are really happy and the staff who are really unhappy are the ones who will take the survey. When we look at the data, we think we believe we've captured them, as well as everyone in between. One of the questions that we threw on there was the benchmarking Net Promoter Score. How likely are you to recommend the JCC as a place of employment? 43% of the responses were promoters. Highest scores 9 and 10s. 26% were detractors, and the remaining 31% in between, passives. So it looks like we captured the range of folks. The only other thing I looked at quickly for today's call was how people felt around departments. The big department for most JCCs is early childhood. They typically represent as much as 30% of the responses on the benchmarking staff surveys. They were 27% of the responses for the 82 JCCs participating in the leading edge survey. So again, looks like we did a good job capturing the range of staff. Quick commercial, because one of my hats is as director of the benchmarking program. We are within a few days of sending out the application for participation. And one of the big changes this year is that the leading edge survey will be the staff survey for benchmarking JCCs. We're not asking JCCs to take it again, use our version of it. It took a bit of work to get there. It took a couple years as well. We wound up needing to add 14 extra questions to what was already a pretty long survey, but we wanted to make sure that we captured everything we needed for benchmarking in this one leading edge survey. So that's been accomplished. I'm still learning. So of those 14 questions, 7 of them fell into the rating categories. From strongly agree to strongly disagree. Do you agree with the following statement? So we added 7 questions in that section. And then we added 7 demographic questions. The JCC departments, which we have found very helpful. The JCC Net Promoter Score. Some questions about reporting level. Those data, I discovered this morning, aren't yet visible to benchmarking JCC, to leading edge JCCs in your Culture Ab platform, but leading edge is adding those, and so they will be there soon. Last benchmarking point: if there's someone on the call or someone in the continent who missed the leading edge survey but wants to be in benchmarking, Leading Edge has agreed in October to roll it out one more time, just for JCCs that missed the spring survey. So it doesn't disqualify you, but if you've already done the Leading Edge survey, you're well on your way to being able to participate in benchmarking. I have just 2 more bullets, a few results, just a couple really high level data points that I pulled from beginning to look at the data for the 6,000 JCC staff. The overall employee engagement favorable score was 73%. 73% agreed or strongly agreed with the statement that they would recommend their JCC as a place to work. It was largely the same as last year, up just 2 percentage points from 2022. Leading Edge says that if it's within 4 percentage points, consider it just statistical noise. So basically the same, and basically the same as for the entire 200, 300 organizations participating in the Leading Edge survey. So the overall engagement of JCC staff, pretty similar to that for other Jewish organizations. The Leading Edge survey, those of you who have taken it or who are looking at the data, divide questions into 12 buckets, 12 factors. For JCCs, the 3 factors that had the highest scores were organizational alignment, direct management, and diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. And the favorable scores for those were range from 81% to 75%. So really strong scores for JCCs overall. And all of those scores were, again, within 2% of the favorable scores for all the Leading Edge organizations. So at least in those areas, we look overall, or we look on average, like most Jewish organizations. The 3 factors with the lowest scores for JCCs were accountability and feedback, work with the board, and salary and benefits. And if there's anyone on the call shocked by salary and benefits, I want to reassure you that it is always, or almost always, the lowest score every year for every organization participating. So not shocking, but it was the lowest score for JCCs as well. And just to go one level further, because each of these factors has 3 or 5 or 8 different questions, the question that got the highest score from JCC staff was, my manager treats me with respect. So good to hear that. 90% of the JCC staff agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. The lowest score was a question in the salary area, and it was the question asked whether my organization has taken action to improve our approach to compensation. So transparency, use of salary bands, explaining how raises are given. The single lowest score among all the questions for JCCs. And in part because I haven't gotten to this next level, and in part just to give you the right guidance, these are average scores, but it doesn't mean that every JCC had the same score. It doesn't mean that even if a factor was a high factor, that every question had a high score in that factor. The questions, there's a lot of variation by question. And one of the things that's really powerful about the Leading Edge platform is their heat map ability, so that you can look at employees by a variety of demographic factors, by tenure, by age, by department. Each organization is able to identify some custom fields as well, and that allows you to look at more in more detail, and that often generates the most useful insights. So in general, we're pretty happy, but the health and wellness staff had a real issue around communication, or whatever the specifics are. So that's where it'll get most interesting. And don't forget, you have to take a deep breath, but the the open-ended comments are also that's what we call the color commentary. It's the flavor. So reading through what could be dozens or hundreds of comments, depending on how big your organization is, it can be really helpful in understanding why a score was high or what exactly staff were thinking about when they completed the survey. Last thing that I want to do, and then I will turn the meeting back to all of you, is what I've called "What Now?" Just sort of the calendar and a couple next steps that the leading edge organizations should be aware of. So as I said, as Joy said, you got your data last week. Consultants got their data the end of the week. One of the things Leading Edge does is it offers every organization 1 or 2 one-hour Zoom consultations, an opportunity with an external professional to think about your data, to see if there are insights that you may have missed, to begin to develop action plans. And so those are being scheduled probably as early as next week and sometime between now and the end of September for that first consultation. And the exec takes the lead on that, including other staff. And my guess is that many of you will be part of those initial conversations. For JCCs, JCC Association, Andy and Joy, along with 12 senior professionals from the association and from JCCs, all people who are deeply familiar with both the Leading Edge survey and with organizational culture, have agreed to participate as consultants for JCCs. And we've all been trained by Leading Edge. And the 14 of us are going to be able to provide about 3/4 of the consultations with Leading Edge or Jewish Federations of North America doing the balance. And the last thing that I'll say, and I'll say this in every one of my consultations as well, is communication is really important. You asked staff to take a survey, and by doing that, you raised expectations. And it's really important, even if the consultation isn't for 2 months and the action plan may not be developed for another 4 months or 6 months. It's really important that working with your exec, you're telling your staff thank you, right? We had 20, we had 50, we had 80 staff who spent the time to share their thoughts with us. We just got the data. We're beginning to digest it. We will be sharing those results with you. For sure, you'll decide what to share and how to share and when to share. I'm not judging that, but you have to share something. You have to share some of the good, some of the bad, and hopefully be able to say to your colleagues, we asked you to take the survey, we listened to what you said, and as a result, we're going to make a couple changes. And it may only be a couple changes, and they may be small changes, but that's what makes this work. It's asking for the feedback and then doing something in response. That's my overview.
That's great, Andy. Thank you. That was a very high, powerful, insightful overview. And I can't highlight enough how important it is for the feedback to your staff. I'm curious if any of you have any questions for either Andy or myself, or who's already looked at their survey results, who has never even heard of Leading Edge EES. This is the time for you to ask us questions and for us to hear from all of you. Okay, Matthew says he hasn't seen an email yet about signing up for a consultation.
I'm not sure, Joy, who would follow up on that, if it's you or Andy. I know we got our email several weeks ago, we're told we had to respond by June 6th, I thought, in order to be assigned somebody, along with who we thought would be the best match for us. So I'm not sure who those emails went to. So Matthew, if you're the one that was, you know, on the, either as a liaison or as, you should have received that email.
The email that went out from Leading Edge on Monday said a couple of things. It said, your data is available, click here to go to the site and see it. You've been assigned a consultant. Here's the consultant's name. Please reach out to him or her to schedule. And here are some resources to help you use the data more effectively. Probably went to the exec, but I'm glad to follow up if there's been a gap.
You got it, Matthew? Sometimes when they have these like really long emails that have everything and we click through to the first thing that we see, it doesn't always remind us. And if you have questions, you can certainly ask us. And there's also programs@leadingedge.org, which is a direct link to Leading Edge. If there seems to be like glitchy things going on with Culture Amp or any questions that you might have about any of that, you can reach out to them as well.
So this could go back to Joy or to Andy, because you guys are both consultants. I've been asked by a couple of people via email, when you do get these results and you read them, especially what we call the color commentary that you referred to, if they speak to somebody specifically and the comments are related to a specific staff member, manager, director, whatever level it may be, what is your approach to advising people on how to manage those appropriately, whether they're positive or negative commentary?
That's a really good question.
Go ahead,
Andy.
Liz. I was just my operating assumption is that the survey is confidential, right? And in benchmarking, when we roll it out and we train staff, we remind them that it's confidential. And I'll often say, and the only way you can screw that up is if you write a comment and you say that, you know, I work in the aquatics area. I've been there for 14 years and you've just identified yourself. So please don't do that. If someone identifies themselves or calls out someone, I sort of would treat it the same way as any kind of anonymous, complaint or compliment. I wouldn't put too much weight on it. I'm always looking for patterns. So if I had, if I see 8 comments about someone, that raises a flag, and that says to me, I've got to at least explore that. I may not do it by saying there were 8 comments in the survey, but I'm looking at ways to learn more. If it's a stray comment, I think the rule is avoid embarrassing anyone.
Yeah, that's a good point. The avoid embarrassing anybody. That we've had situations where there are comments that come through, or when you sort the results by department and supervisor or manager, and all of a sudden you see one department is really getting dinged on a number of things. I've always taken the approach of reaching out to the executive before I bring that up in a consultation meeting, especially if that person, that manager, is going to be in the room. I don't want to highlight, the finance department got really bad scores, and here's the finance department person sitting there. And oftentimes, as the consultant, we've been told, we know that there's a problem in that department, or that person is on probation or something like that. So there's always like the behind the scenes knowledge that we don't know as a consultant that you might be able to flesh out within your organization if you see some of those things without revealing who made those comments. What other questions might you have about the survey or the consultations?
For those that have taken it in the past, I guess I'm gonna jump in and ask the question, what have you found most helpful, and or what successes have you experienced from your action plan that others might benefit from if they're newer to the process.
I can pop in, take advantage of the templates. It does have to work for you. So presentations to staff, Leading Edge has a bunch of there's like a PowerPoint presentation template that you can kind of fill in, looking at your kind of top 3 areas. I found that, we kind of go through with a fine-tooth comb on the back end of it. Our executive, myself, David, our associate HR director, and our COFO, we go through it in quite detail. When we present it to the full staff, we don't go into that much detail. We give high level, here is our top 3 areas, here is the areas of strength and some overall stuff. But last year was the first time that we did it. And one of the things that we found really helpful, we presented those findings and our action plan all at the same time. This year we may split that up a bit. We're looking to actually incorporate some of our action plan. There's actions that we're already starting to take because we preemptively could see some of where the deficiencies were anyway. So we're not looking to double the work. We're looking to actually, how do we frame that and actually communicate that out of this is going to hit these things plus all of these other pieces. So kind of looking to see where else that filters through. So it might be your top, accentuating the strengths or addressing more of the deficiencies, but there might be a bunch of other things in between that you can kind of mark to show that you're actually hitting multiple pieces. Before this year's survey, we actually and had some follow-up throughout, but we deliberately David loves the heat map. We deliberately spelled out the actions that we took and some of the results that came out of that survey before we went into this year's survey. So if there was question about, will you take action? We find that staff often aren't making the connections of the actions that are being taken with that. So we have tried to spell that out wherever we could throughout the year. So that continuous communication I found has been really helpful. And we saw the overall, I would say on average, we had more kind of uptrend than downtrend in most of the questions. So
I'll jump in and say I echo everything Angie just said about especially using the templates. I love pulling it and comparing it from year to year or department to department. It's just such a great tool to use when reporting out. And the heat map is awesome. It really is a great visual of where you're doing well. And the action plans have been so helpful to us. And that's a great point, is to make sure that the staff knows that what you're using from the survey is what you're doing. Like last year, ours was collaboration. So we were very just thoughtful when presenting to staff and telling them what action steps we're going to take in order to make us more collaborative. So anybody else have anything that they use?
So just to go a little bit into the heat map and why I like it so much is I think it really lets you break down and find out that everything is not necessarily equal. A single score isn't necessarily representative of what's going on in each department or with each supervisor. And being able to break down and look at your results and say, oh, hey, maybe this department's struggling. Let's give them a little bit more assistance because their scores are routinely lower than other areas, or to say, this set of staff, like our contractors who answered this, just are a lot less happy than our salaried and hourly staff. You can sort of pinpoint where different issues are a little bit more easily than just looking at the overall survey data. The only trick is I keep on forgetting to switch it from the delta to favorable score. So if you could reverse the default on that, I'd love it even more.
he remembers to remind me though. It's great. I would add one thing about the heat map too, is just I have to remind myself of being careful of, just because you're seeing red show up on the heat map doesn't mean it's too far off of what your average is. So if you're seeing a lot of that under a certain, it's really that you want to look for like a larger discrepancy. So like the deeper the color, whether red or green actually, is where those standouts are. Anything in between, it can be a bit of a wash.
So to go back to what Andy was saying too, I think we have to remember like the percentage of change, right? Anything within 4% is, basically the same as we look at this, and shouldn't be alarming to like that there's something major going on in that regard. What has anybody done an action plan or some major step that went over really well with staff as far as culturally related, right? To move the needle.
I can jump in. It's our first and a half. We did kind of like a partial launch last year for one department. This year, we rolled it out to the whole organization, and we got the results Monday, and we already had a meeting with all of our directors almost immediately. We've kind of known there's some communication things on our end and kind of aggregating the data. One of the things we put in were flagging not only directors, but then assistant directors, managers, and that kind of hierarchy as you go down. One of the things that we noticed kind of out the bat, I think it was like a 77% favorable for communication for directors. And then when you went to assistant directors, that plummeted like 27%. And so we were just immediately like out the gate, and we just put it back on our director team of, we're seeing this communication breakdown. How can we help? And kind of putting it back on each of those teams. Where we are struggling a little bit is because we can aggregate by that supervisor. We have been able to see, department A is maybe a little not happy, but then when you dive into it a little bit deeper, if you directly report to person A, 0% satisfaction. If you report person B, you're kind of in that midline. So we're able to see a little bit more. We're not giving that personal feedback in a public setting by any means. I don't think that's productive to call people out like that, but we are having follow-up meetings with those folks who are a little bit lower than they should be and kind of standing out. One thing I did just want to flag, just because I noticed it on the heat map, each of the questions in that survey has where you can see like, this was the biggest variance within this question for us. Over and over and over and over again, race. But then we went to that heat map. Well, the race portion pulled out because there were 4 people who identified as more than one race. And those people were consistently lower on everything. And so that ended up skewing our data, where every other category was really happy, but those 4 people were just yanking the scores down. So we kind of were able to aggregate out that that's maybe not necessarily what's happening here. Let's look at this in a different way. And that was really helpful. So even though that was like the number one thing, those 4 people were impacting 60, 70 other responses in that way. So that's kind of how we've tackled it. And we're doing the same thing. We're like, our C-suite's getting a like 8-page report, and our director team got like a page handout of this is where we are compared to nation, and kind of putting it back on them to start owning. I think that went really well for us because it kind of put people back in the driver's seat of, we see it, this is a problem, go fix it, and we'll help you fix it. And that's how we've kind of approached it for now.
So Andy, back to you shared that like the percentage rate at the JCCs is, I think, in the 40s, right? As far as people are actually participating in the survey. Is it higher or lower than your previous years of experience? Because to me, that kind of seems low. I know their goal is always 100%, but they say they're happy at 80, and we're coming in at like 50% of that. So what do we attribute that to? And like what, I know we came in for RJ this year much higher than we had 2 years ago. But like, how do we get people to remain interested and participate?
And let me say a couple of things. We set a goal of 80% participation for the board survey, right? The most committed, most engaged volunteers working with the JCC. We almost never see anything near that on staff surveys. 50%-ish is typically what we've seen in benchmarking. And we have seen that number drop a little bit. I think it's a couple of things. I think there is survey fatigue. I know the last few years have been really stressful, and staff who were already working their tails off have even more work to do. They're even busier. So I think that had some impact. Leading edge both from talking to Leading Edge and talking to some of the JCCs that were struggling, one of the issues that we just need to fix moving forward was providing personal emails for staff rather than JCC emails, and folks just aren't as responsive to a strange email showing up in their personal email. And then something that we talk about all the time, the issue of trust. Are these data confidential? Is it safe to take the survey? And so for at least some of the JCCs, they said that was a huge issue that they kept hearing in conversations as they tried to encourage participation.
I'll add on one other factor to that, and that is that some of the newer JCCs did like an employee dump, and anybody that gets a paycheck got the survey. And that's often the lifeguards and that, you know, that 1 or 2 hour person, and they then didn't answer. So that brings the average down a little bit.
I will say that also we give like all of the survey, the census, like a couple of months before. And by the time we actually give out the survey, we have a number of staff that have left and they're not taken off of the census. So I'm not really sure what could be done about that. That's happened a few years now in a row, and it really skews our numbers. We also had a lot of staff not answer too. So.
By the way, one of the hints about trust is to look at the percentage of staff who didn't answer questions. So that in my consulting work with JCCs, what I see, a 10-15% number of staff who didn't tell you what department they worked for, or how old they were, or how long they've been at the organization. To me, that's a hint that they were nervous about you figuring out who they were. Even though it's impossible, it's absolutely impossible. If you see a lot of no answer on questions, that's a little bit of a heads up. By the way, this is really silly, but one of the things I didn't fully appreciate until last year was the ability to download data into an Excel file, to download the question data, to download a heat map. One of the JCCs I'm working with already shared with me the Excel file they created comparing 23 to 22 to 21 to 19. They had to do it. They had to download each of those files and then compile it into a single spreadsheet so they could look at the comparisons across factors and across questions. But at least for me, while I think the platform is really powerful, there are things that I find easier to see and to manipulate in Excel. So take advantage of that if that's how you operate, or there's someone on the team who is likes data that way.
Do we have other questions for anybody else, or any other comments that people like to make as far as the survey, if you've reviewed it, if you haven't, if you'd like to get together and, compare notes and download after you've had your, met with your consultants? What will this group like moving forward?
Possibly sharing action plans might be helpful for the group, I think, of like what actions people are taking on certain areas.
We've also heard from Leading Edge that they're going to do a high-level look up at the hot topics across the board and start to provide different kinds of trainings and ideas different than the action items. So hosting webinars on specific topics based on the hot topics. So you should keep an eye out for that coming in the fall.
Nobody has any other comments or want to delve further into this today? We would be happy to get people back in time in their day. I know we all have crazy busy schedules, but I don't want to cut anybody short if they, want to share any further information either.
I think one thing that, not necessarily for right now, but for the next round of leading edge surveys, it might be useful to do a pre-survey discussion on what the target audience at each J is, so that we can better try to align which populations we're surveying versus not surveying. I think that might help. Like we've talked a little bit of today about, whether to include some contractors, whether to include part-time staff, etc. Maybe before the next round, before we all decide these are the groups to include, we do a bit of a planning meeting on, how to align all of the JCCs so that we're getting similar data sets.
Thank you for that, David. I know that we held, I think it was 2 info sessions before the HRIS was due. And we tend to find that the people that attend those are new to the survey system rather than people who have taken it before. But I like the idea of inviting voices from people who have taken it before so that we can all share and then have good data.
Right, and both who to include and how to fill out your HRIS. Some of the organizations we work with are really strategic in thinking about categories that might be important drivers in their organization, and to share that wisdom, I think would be helpful.
On that, I think for us, having just gone through this realistically for the first time, the data in that spreadsheet was super helpful. I wish in hindsight I had a little bit better understanding of how to aggregate that data in terms of like the optional fields. So like we combined like marketing is 3 people, membership is 2 people, that's one category, but then 2 people didn't fill it out. So we have no information for marketing and membership, and those weird nuances I didn't really factor in. Our camp is 21 people, but there's only 3 full-time. None of the part-time filled it out. We have no camp data. So those kind of weird nuances I think would have been helpful. Not that it's super important on our end. In terms of like action items and engagement, that was like for us tied in already to things that we were actively working on, like adjusting our staff meetings, making newsletters. So we were just taking basically the information that we have now, going to send a thank you, and start developing ways to get employees to engage with us a little bit more, particularly like C-suite leadership, having new hires meet C-suite, having like coffee with C-suite, happy hour. So you have alcoholic and non, whatever that may be. We don't necessarily anticipate people going to those things, but the option of having that option, I think, is more impactful for us at least. And then we're kind of building in like a newsletter and things like that. So that communication piece for us was really important. One thing we did see in terms of like the engagement score, which I think that was like the big thing for everything. We noticed a decline from last year. Last year, we had done this huge overhaul of our benefits and our perks and discount lists, and we had a lot of really positive feedback. Nothing has changed from last year to this year, and that score tanked. People were not happy. They didn't understand. They didn't know. And we kind of realized it's not that the perk is any different. We're just not communicating that perk. And so those are the things that we're going to try to do to see if we can up that score a little bit for next year.
One thing I am curious about, because we're talking about the different demographics, we've now for 2 years tried to, because we try to get, we want to hear the voices across the board, and we do have some of our more contract staff that do work regularly and have worked for us for a number of years, trying to get that information. And some of them are actually pretty forthcoming with filling it out, others not at all. But I keep getting separate feedback saying, like, most of this doesn't actually apply to us. And I'm wondering if there's any thoughts about actually having a separate survey geared towards that staff. So like a pared down version or something that could be benchmarked across the board. I know it's something that I'm thinking about, next year pulling them out, but how do we actually survey to get the feedback for anybody who wants to actually give it?
But are they staff or are they contractors?
Some of them are staff. So some of them we have on as like just regular payroll, but they're working infrequently. Like they're coming in and they're working, it's like our lifeguards or whatever. Now we did have an okay number considering how many that did reply, But again, for how involved that they are, depending on the level, they're finding that some of those questions are like really out of scope for them. But in other areas, I think their feedback is actually super important, because sometimes we don't see how like the communication, for instance, trickles down all the way to our lifeguards. Where are they kind of missing and stuff like that. So yeah.
We have the same issue. Like we just moved all of our personal trainers as employees, and they work maybe a few hours a week, some of them, and it's just hard to get them to be engaged, fill it out.
That's
We
good
ran into
feedback.
that too with like teachers, like what does a teacher know, or would they know about the board? So we, like, our board was just neutral. No one had any feedback on the board because no one works with them. So that was a weird data that we saw as well on our end.
It's nice though now that they asked, do you work with the board? Because before they just went right into questions about the board, and they got really bad scores because they're like, I don't know who the board is. Yeah.
What I found interesting about the board questions, or the feedback we got that I've read so far, is that they feel that the board's not engaged enough at a volunteer level in the agency. They're just more on it for their resume. That's how they feel. True or not, right? True or not, they don't feel the support or that they would hope to get from a board member. That's not just monetary, that they want them to be more involved, which I found quite interesting. And the other way we got people involved, which I know Ashley and I talked about at some point a while ago, is the last week or the last couple of days of the survey, I just walked around and asked people like, hey, could you do me a favor? Can you take the time and do this? Like, just personalized approach to people. And we got more and more people to be engaged. I went from 6 out of 25 teachers to having like 19 out of 25 do it. So I think it's just, people read their emails, they go, yeah, I'll do it. But I think that it just, the follow up on the one-on-one conversations to get them to see that it's important to you, not just a piece of paper that came in the mail or a flyer or an email, was a personal touch, I think drove us much further this year in getting responses.
For teachers, we actually had luck having EC administration go in and cover one person at a time, so they could go out and do it.
Our director also did that.
Yeah, last year, one of our admin team, when I said, I was looking at numbers and I was like, oh, it's a little bit low. I'd love to hear from more of the teachers, and she did that, and we had like great response. It wasn't quite as successful this year. It was a different staff doing it, but it definitely helped to get that feedback. And it was important because they definitely skewed lower than the rest.
We heard that one JCC reported to us that they had like a departmental challenge going on. So depending, like the managers, it was their responsibility, the supervisors of that department, to try to get their staff. And then the department that had the highest response percentage got a pizza party or something like that. So put it on the managers to get their staff to do it and have some kind of incentive.
Would there be a way through Leading Edge? I know we can't get contact information for the staff that actually did the survey, because that would defeat confidentiality, but would it be possible for JCCs to be like, we want to offer $100 gift card to someone randomly drawn from the people who submitted, and then just have Leading Edge provide us with, or indirectly through Leading Edge, get in touch with that person and provide that prize?
That has come up. Leading Edge has indicated that they don't have the ability to do that.
Okay.
Although they said that at least one JCC, it wasn't a prize. It was everyone who printed out their confirmation. Thank you for completing the survey. Got the whatever the incentive was. So it was on the employee side, not on the Leading Edge side.
Not a bad idea.
I tried to bribe people with fewer emails from me if we hit a certain number, but it didn't work.
Well, I think we provided some good basic information, and we can continue the conversation further as we, move down the line and actually review and analyze and come up with our action plans. I'd like to thank everybody for their time, especially Andy for jumping on last minute to give us the high level information. It's greatly appreciated. It's great to hear the averages across the nation, because it kind of helps us know where we fall within that. And Joy as well for your insights as far as your years of experience with Leading Edge as well. Barring that no one else has any last minute comments, thank you all for your time, and we look forward to seeing you. And Joy, I'm not in my office, I don't have my calendar. When is our next scheduled community meeting?
I think we're in September, and we'll send out that in a brief shortly to be able to have everybody put that on their calendars.
Great, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Andy. Greatly appreciate. Oh, he left. Thank you, Michelle.
Thanks, Joy. Appreciate it.
All right, say hi. Say hi to my friends at camp.
I will.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
bye.